Hey, it's me, Peaky King, how you doing? Okay, so I know I said this every episode now, but we do have a lot to go over, so go ahead and subscribe because wow, and I'll go ahead and get started. First of all, if you stayed to the end of my Halloween video, you would have seen Loden's soft resprite. Yeah, I changed some stuff to his idol that I talked about like an episode or 2 or 3 ago, something like that, and I went back and updated most or if not all of his movement basically to fit the smaller cheeks, the different idol. You would have seen this in action in my last video where I played Loden towards the end of it. I played a bunch of workshop characters with my roommate that knows nothing about workshop. It was very funny. At the end I played Loden. Go check that out if you want to see Loden in action. But now that we're here, I can more properly explain all of that. And while we're still kind of on the subject of movement, I did all his dodges and his air dodges and stuff like that. And honestly, I think a lot of them are pretty fucking cute. Especially in his air dodge where he puts on his hood and puts up his mask and pulls his drawstrings. I just think that's really cute. There were a lot of small miscellaneous stuff that I did, like I gave him his platform that's all animated and shiny, and some moves I added like a frame or two, like just to make them look a little bit better, but those are stuff that I didn't really keep tab on or they're just not as important to really highlight right now. But while we're on the subject of looks, let's go to the CSS. I took the commonly used template that a lot of characters have and just moved it around, trying to make it just a little different. I just kind of played with it for a bit. I had an acorn and a plus and minus so you knew how the alts were changing those colors, just in case you wanted to know that. And I tried to make the drawstring colors all different. I tried a couple things. At first I just did whatever looked cool, and then I was like, no, I'll make like the red darker and the blue lighter, but honestly I'm not too sure. I don't know. I feel like the color is more important than the symbols that they use, and I'll get more into that later. So I'm thinking of just going back and changing all the red and blue to always be red and blue no matter what alt you have. Maybe changing like in value a little bit or saturation just a little bit to go with the alt better, but I think I'm gonna keep it all blue and red. I don't really know yet. Still playing around with that. That kind of falls more into the balance area in my eyes. But I guess while we're talking about the alts, I'll just run through all of them again really quick because they did change a little. So this one's obviously the default. This one's based off his original color scheme that he had up in old art, but obviously didn't keep that. Trans Pride because Loden is canonically trans male, but also just trans rights. Bi Pride mainly because red and blue it makes sense, but also bi, so great. Tux, this was inspired by Lender's comment suggesting it. Kind of made little bits of like dark blue and stuff like that because there just wasn't much blue in any other alt. But you know, Secret Agent Spy, that's like his whole thing. Tux made perfect sense, thank you. Early access because everybody has this and it looks really cool, so I had to do it too. Melon, my boyfriend actually made this one. He says the name Apple would also work. This one's Treetop because Loden's from the Treetops, and you know, I just kind of like this color scheme. This one, I don't even know if it's here yet when I'm editing it, but this one's on hold for Delta Parallax. He's an amazing musician in our community, but I'll get into why he gets a skin later. This one was made by Deor, or Deor. I like saying Deor, okay? I'm sorry. He's an excellent coder in the workshop, and if you're wondering why he also gets to make a skin, I'll get into that later. Here's where we start with a lot of references to some of my favorite characters, and I think I did pretty well. I'm really proud of these. Royal, this one's referencing Coconut Bun's King Briggs. I've sung his praise in the past so much, so I won't waste your time, but I just had to do it, not to mention Peaky King, you know, the royal colors, like, it just fit perfectly. Rough, this one's referencing Equinox Doodle's Penny. I love Penny, I love Penny so much. I've sung Penny's praise a lot. I put Penny in the portrait before Penny was even out. We all know this. And I think she's getting a resprite. I don't know. So if Penny's getting a resprite, then this might not be as accurate because it has Penny's resprite kind of has less greens. So I don't know. We'll see. But I still really like this color scheme, so I think it should be okay. Icon. This is for the lovely Palm by Rumi Knights. Palm is an amazing character with small ties to Loden's story. If you watch that episode. And it's just an easy excuse for purple out, but also Ruby Knights is super talented and amazing, so I had to put that in here. Sparks, this one's my personal favorite. It's Geeks Malo, the classic, an OG. I had to do it. This color scheme is bomb. Get it? You know, they both have masks. I kind of like to think that their paths would have collided in the future timeline. I don't know. That's just my little headcanon of my own character. But, you know, had to do it. Gem, this one is obviously for Olympia. Hey Sprite Star, I love the character. Not really though, like Pink Claws, I don't know, it's fucking dumb. I had to do it. And lastly, the Abyss alt, because this is Rivals. I have to do this. I didn't have a choice. Okay, cool. I don't know if that's going to change too much, but we already talked about that, so we'll see. But even if that does change, if that doesn't change, it's going to change more than Loden. Are you gonna catching on what I'm leading? We're gonna talk about the special moves now. Okay, special moves. I didn't really do anything. Deor made basically everything. Deor's been helping me, well, more like just coding Loadent specials and gimmick, while also fixing everything I tried to do that isn't working, while also eradicating all the code left over by Sandberg. He's been pretty good help. You've probably seen a lot of the stages he's worked on. He's super talented. He's even sent me work on characters he's working on that have magnetic powers as well. So like, I don't know, this just kind of perfectly fit into place. Like, it just was perfect. The only special he didn't have a hand in is the up special. I mentioned this in the last the workshop video I did with my roommate, but I asked Sakamoto and Archie if I could use him as up B for Loadent, and they both agreed to it. And so I'm very, very thankful for that. Thank you. But I also had to change it up a little bit just for my, just for myself. I just wanted it to be a little different. Besides just vaguely adjusting values that, again, I don't know how to code, so I was kind of just changing numbers and seeing what would happen. I actually have it so when you hit an enemy, it pulls them towards you, just so that you kind of link up and do some cool combos and things like that. Again, playtest is going to come in later because right now it's kind of like a free kill off stage. It's a little busted. I'm still playing around with it, but I do still like the idea, so I'm gonna keep it and play on it differently some way. I don't know. We'll figure that out when we get there. Okay, back to the other moves. I know you've heard about them a lot, but they have changed in function a little bit, or I just explained them poorly, or you probably forgot because I don't really blame you. So I'm just gonna quickly go over them again. Okay, let's start with down B. A multi-hit tail attack that changes your charge, first positive, then to negative. This is his main gimmick. You can keep the charge to affect basically all your tail moves. Your tail moves are side tilt, the back of nair, fair, and up air. You can also give the charge to an acorn or a nut. Side B spits out one of those acorns that you can kind of slightly arc up. They stay in place in the air and you can grapple to them with up B. When you hold down B while an acorn is out in the field, you will shoot a strong charge to that acorn and give it that electromagnetic field that you had. A positive field will either push you through it with enough momentum or will keep you locked in place. And a negative field will just kind of bounce you off as long as you're not moving too fast. I believe it ignores any horizontal or vertical speed types that are forced over the whole window, so it doesn't interrupt most recoveries. I didn't want it to be too broken, but I mean, it's not too big, and with how diverse the recoveries and rivals are, I don't think this should be too much of an issue. Also, you can hit these and they break in one hit. Also, when Loadent enters one of his fields, it refreshes his up special. So you can kind of get some unique recoveries with that. It's not too much of a worry for him. For his neutral B, he spits out the nut. This nut is just a pretty good projectile, honestly. It won't do any damage unless it's going a certain speed, but you can hit it with a lot of your moves. It will find directions, it will hit your opponents, it will bounce off the fields that you have out, or it will get stuck inside of them and be like an active moving hitbox on the field. It's a pretty diverse little nut. Now if you have a charge on your tail, you will actually give that charge to the nut. I mean, you'll still have it, but it will also go to the nut. If it's a negative charge, it will have increased knockback when it hits your opponent, and if it has a positive charge, it will do reverse knockback, so it will hit them inwards. Very good for combos. Personally, when it comes to special moves, I love having a negative field out and then a positive charge on my tail, so I can hit the acorn around, bounce it like on the negative field, and make it come backwards from behind, hit them, really throws them off, kind of having so many different things out everywhere and really playing with your opponent like that. It's so much fun. Hitting them with the positive nut and have them fly towards you and hitting them back into it, like it's really funny, kind of ping pong for a bit. It's great, it's great. Okay, so I know this whole series is supposed to be recapping the process of making a rival's character, and there's a lot of stuff that I can't really quite explain as well as I would like to. I don't know exactly what elements of this you guys are here for, but I want to make sure I at least touch every corner a little bit. So I asked Deor if he could speak on his experiences working on Loadent, things like that, his troubles, his things he's learned, blah blah blah, what the hell ever. So I'm gonna turn it over to him so you guys can listen to him for a bit, and then I'll come back later. But pay attention to this beautiful man.
Hi, I'm Deor, and I'm doing the coding for Loadent's gimmick and more complex moves. I haven't really done a talk like this before, and I'm not 100% positive the best way to structure it, so I guess I'll just jump right into my process and wing it from there. First thing I did upon taking up the project was to look through the design document I was provided, clarify any questions I had with PK, and make a list of priorities in order to implement mechanics based on perceived difficulty and prerequisites. Not all of these assumptions ended up being correct, and during development, some of them got shuffled around a bit, or just added in general because they weren't something I had thought of when I initially read the design document. But for the most part, things ran smoothly. The first thing I implemented was Loden's charge system, which was simply enough to do, but was required for the other mechanics to work. I just set up a variable called charge, and started at 0 for neutral, and it would flip its value between 1 and -1 when down special was used, defaulting to 1 if it's currently 0. While I was at it, I also implemented the knockback modifiers for charge tail hitboxes. Positive charge attracts, so it has decreased knockback, and negative charge repels, so it has increased knockback. Next, I implemented what I really consider the star of the show, which is the acorn that produces the electric field. I started by setting up what's called a finite state machine, which is basically just a fancy term for something that has a bunch of different possible states or modes it can switch between, a lot like a fighting game character. In fact, a fighting game character is an example of a finite state machine. This is something I like to do with most articles I make, as it allows for a lot of flexibility and control of the finer details of how the code runs, on top of making the code much more organized, which makes it easier to go back and make changes as you need to. The meat of the Acorn's code is the field generation code, which accelerates and redirects players and projectiles based on the Acorn's current charge. Now, in full disclosure, I had actually already programmed a similar mechanic for a personal project, and I used that as a base. Basically, it loops through all objects of a particular type and compares the location of the center of their sprite to the center of the acorn. And if they're within a certain range, apply a formula based on Coulomb's law, which sounds kind of scary, but it's pretty simple. You have a number that represents the strength of the field, you multiply that by the charge, which tells us whether we're going to pull in or push out, and then you divide everything by the distance to the acorn squared. And the reason you square it is so that the strength of the field decreases as you get further away from the acorn. That way it behaves more like a real electromagnetic field. It also creates more interesting and nuanced interactions, which increases the depth of the character. This gives us a velocity that we can add to the object either towards or away from the acorn. Now, there's some polish and ballast adjustments on top of that to make sure it doesn't send a player into orbit or interrupt a player while they're recovering, but that's the gist of it. And luckily, largely because I'd done it before, there weren't really many major bugs to hammer out, and everything more or less worked as expected. While I was at it, I also finished up down specials functionality, which relied on the acorn to be in play in order to work. What the move is supposed to do is, if the acorn is out and you hold down special long enough, a lightning bolt will shoot from Loden to the acorn, transferring its charge over. This was an interesting challenge because it meant having a thin hitbox that could be of any length and at any angle, which is technically impossible in the Rivals engine. The solution I came up with was to trace a line from Loden to the acorn that searched for players, and adding any players found to a list. Then I would go through that list and spawn a small hitbox at the center of any player found. In theory, I think that's more efficient than just spawning a line of hitboxes, because it means fewer objects are created at once, but I definitely could be wrong about that. At this point, it became more apparent that the temporary marker I had been using to show what Loden's current charge was not sufficient. So PK and I talked and decided the best option would be to have Loden's tail fade back and forth between his natural tail color and the color of his current charge, which I did by separating both the charge color and the tail color into their red, green, and blue channels, and generating a new color on the fly using cosine functions and setting the tail color to that. The graph here demonstrates it using the default color values from the tail color to positive. I could go into the math of how I generated this function, but I don't know if anyone would actually be particularly interested in that. I saved what I thought was going to be the easiest of the main mechanics for last, Loden's nut. That was not so much the case. I started by trying to make it work with a regular projectile so that I wouldn't have to specially program in an interaction with the acorn's electric field. Unfortunately, after working with it for a while, I found that I didn't have enough fine control with how projectiles work to implement the feature, and I would need to make it an article. So I made another article and set up another finite state machine for it, which used the same states as the acorn. Now, it's supposed to work more or less like Wii Fit's soccer ball, so I needed hitbox interaction. And for that interaction, I used a modified version of the block code from NES Kirby, with permission from Buttercup, of course. What's important about that particular code is that it takes hitbox priority and hit pause into account, which makes it much more consistent and feels nicer to use. It's something I could have coded myself, but by getting permission to use code that had already been written, it definitely saved me a lot of time. Once I got that working, which wasn't too much of a problem, I ran into my first real problem: platform interaction. You see, it needed to be able to go up through platforms, but also land on them like a player does, which is easier said than done. My first thought was to only check for platforms along the nut's trajectory if the nut was already moving downwards. That turned out to not be enough, as if the peak of its arc was inside a platform sprite, it would get stuck. My initial band-aid for this was to check 1 pixel above the nut for platforms as well, which worked well enough but had some jank to it on edge cases that I wasn't really happy with. The solution I ended up on was comparing the Y value of the nut to the Y value of the nearest platform, and if it was above it and about to touch, it'll land instead. Which was actually something I wanted to do at first, but it took me a while to figure out how to actually access the platform's Y value. With that taken care of, I moved on to giving it spin when a player hits it, which worked fine in principle. That is, unless it landed with a certain speed and at a certain angle, which happened more often than you might think. This caused it to go into these stable loops where it would flop around in place but never settle, meaning that it would keep producing a hitbox. I spent way too long trying to figure out how to fix it, and I eventually realized that it only happens when a charged acorn is out. It turned out that when I had copied the electric field code that detects projectiles and repurposed it for the nut, I left in a term that sets its rotation to always be in the direction that it's moving, which was supposed to only apply inside the field, but I had placed it where it applied everywhere by mistake. When I moved that inside the field check, it suddenly worked perfectly, like magic. And that's about it. There's still some polishing I need to do and a couple of oversights I need to set straight, but it works and is, if I do say so myself, reasonably polished for an alpha build. All in all, I'm happy to have gotten an opportunity to work on this project, and I'm excited to see what the future holds for Loden. Thanks, and I hope you all have a great day.
With all that being said, you only really get half the experience without the audio. So I know there's lots and lots of audios to use in just the Rival database and with just online and stuff like that, but I really wanted some unique ones, at least for most of his attacks. So I hit up Delta Parallax, who, if you think you don't know, let me prove you wrong. Creator of Laika, member of Seeds of Aether, created victory themes for Cupcake, like many others. His music is playing right now. He recently opened commissions for music, sound effects, and coding, so if you like what you hear, all his links will be in the description. I commissioned him for Loden sound effects. Some of them are still just Rivals sounds, but some of the more unique-ish ones, like claw swipes, the field noises, electric sounds, those are all him. I'm not sure if I will have those sounds by the time I'm editing this video. I don't expect to, but I know they're going to be amazing, and I'll have them fully ready for you next episode. Actually, speaking of next episode, we're kind of reaching the end here. let me think about it. Next episode, sound effects if I didn't have them right now. Visual effects, I talked about how I want to do that. His taunt, I still need to do that. Some balancing here and there, and I think that should be all of next episode. I think that gives me just enough time to have him ready by Zeta's Direct. If you missed it for some reason, my guy Zeta announced another Direct. I believe it is called Workshop Blueprints on February 15th. Thank you for making it in February and not January. I love you, oh my god. So if you want to play Loden, you'll probably want to be at that Direct. Just saying. I decided I want to focus on his trailer for a little bit, so I'm not going to work on things like the stage or character compatibility or runes or his little Twitter thing that I had going on until after he's out. Once he's released, then I'll do all those other stuff in separate videos, so the Loden adventure is not done. But I do also have some other ideas, some other projects that I do kind of want to get started. I want to start testing out. I want to give Loden my fair attention, but at the same time, do have so many ideas. So, we'll see. Just make sure you're at that Direct. Either way, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I know I'm taking my sweet, sweet time with Loda, and I'm sorry, but he will be in your hands soon enough. I promise. If you have any questions, like always, just leave them in the comments. I'll do my best to respond. And I guess that's all I really have right now. Thank you for watching. I'll see you tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. Probably actually next year. Yeah, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, all that jazz. Alright, bye, love you, bye.